deep listening and close listening also requires us to be active. In fact, there's a technique for this that's known as looping for understanding. And it has these 3 steps. Step 1 is you ask a question. Step 2 is after the person answers that question, you repeat back what you heard them say in your own words. And what you're really doing there is you're proving to them that you're paying attention. So that's step 2. Step 3 is after you've repeated back what you heard the person say, ask them if you got it right. Did I hear you correctly? Because what we're doing at that moment is we are asking them for permission to acknowledge that we were listening. And that's really, really powerful because if I believe that you are listening to me, I become more likely to listen to you in return.
That is today's guest, Charles Duhigg, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of 3 best-selling books, including his latest, which we are focusing on today. It's called Supercommunicators: How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. Connection is what we're all about as travelers, right? On the road, we want to connect with locals. We want to connect with fellow travelers, of course, at home as well. And in this conversation, you're going to get several practical and powerful frameworks that can literally help you transform how you connect with others, whether it's your spouse, your colleagues, your children, your friends, maybe somebody you just met on the road. You're going to learn the 3 distinct types of conversations we all have and why mismatching them leads to frustration, a simple 3-word question that can instantly improve communication with anyone, how deep questions unlock authentic connection, even with strangers, and loads more. So whether you're looking to deepen your existing relationships, perhaps create more opportunity for authentic connections at home or while traveling, this episode offers a ton of valuable takeaways. And Charles and I did talk a bit about his travels in Central America, but I thought, I need to add a bit more travel into this one for you. So you're also going to get a special segment. I'm going to do a destination spotlight on a hidden gem I've visited many times over the years, and I'm excited to get back to at some point soon. Baltimore, Maryland. You're going to hear my curated list of some of the best things to do, eat, and see, plus why it's the perfect time to visit Charm City. And it's all happening in this episode right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for being here, allowing me to bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms. And today, we're taking a meta look at the art of communication, which is, when you think about it, really at the heart of almost everything we do as humans. If you want to learn more about our guest's work, you can go to his website, charlesduhigg.com. We'll link up to that in the show notes. And I read his book, Supercommunicators: How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection, which we talk about today. And as I mentioned at the top, ton of takeaways in this one. So I hope it helps you foster those connections at home and out on the road. And as I mentioned, I wanted to dash in a little bit more travel in this one. You're going to hear the best of Baltimore, an unforgettable, authentic getaway. Baltimore, Maryland is one of those hidden gem destinations that I feel like either people make it a day trip or they just skip over it entirely, because you've got DC, you've got New York City, you've got all these places to visit on the East Coast. So you're going to hear what I will do on my next visit to Baltimore. And along the way, of course, I know as a traveler, if you're like me, you love to just discover some of the experiences you might have in a destination. You're going to get plenty of that in this special segment. Of course, stick around on the back end. I'll wrap this all up with a thoughtful quote from an ancient Greek philosopher that will tie this one up nicely. And just so you know, the Baltimore segment will be coming after my conversation with Charles. One last thing, zerototravel.com/newsletter is where you can sign up for our free newsletter. I write it, goes out once a week. Please keep in touch over there. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Charles. Please enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Charles Duhigg, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
What a wonderful book. Wonderful book. I read it, Supercommunicators. Can you help me learn how to make a 6-year-old listen? That's what I'm here for, man. Are you going to solve all of my problems today, Charles?
I'm not sure that like I have the magical wand for a 6-year-old because they have their own communication issues, and sometimes it has nothing to do with how you communicate. It has to do with them being 6. But I think we can at least help a little bit.
Yeah, I think my wife would say the same thing about me, just in a different context. She'd be like, "Oh, it has to do with him being 50."
Right.
We're all grown-up kids in some ways. I saw a couple years ago, you and your wife, at least you two, went to surf camp in El Salvador. Is that right?
Yeah.
How was that?
It was great. So we actually lived in Costa Rica for a little while and surfed a lot there. My wife is a marine biologist and I'm a journalist, and she was on sabbatical, and so we moved to Nosara, Costa Rica, for about 6 months and surfed a lot while we were there. And then now we live in Santa Cruz, California, where we can surf regularly, but we wanted to get better. And so we went to this surf camp called Puro Surf in El Salvador. It's actually in San Salvador, which is one of the cities. And it was amazing. Like, I've never been to a surf camp that has been this good in terms of just helping you level up and understand the fundamentals of how to get better at surfing. They videotape every single session, so you can sit down with your coach and you can go frame by frame through to figure out what you're doing. It was great. We really, really enjoyed it. And El Salvador obviously is not a place that many people vacation. But I think it's really turned around. The infrastructure still is not what it is in like Costa Rica, but it's like the crime has abated, it feels more stable, and they definitely want tourists there, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's so cool too when you get, especially in the modern era when we're all so busy, when you get like a full week or whatever it is to go do something like this where you can just fully immerse yourself in this one thing, which seems for some reason so hard to do nowadays.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's a luxury, right? To be able to focus on something for a week. And particularly when you're in a foreign country, as you know, you sort of get more opportunities to do that.
How was the Costa Rica experience? What brought you there? Was that something working remotely? Was it the first time you did it? Was it something you wanted to test? What was the...
Well, it was because my wife was on sabbatical and because she works on marine systems, and she had a number of collaborations in Costa Rica with different labs there. And also we wanted to try living in Costa Rica. We had been going there for a decade, and we used to go to Playa Grande, which is a little bit farther up the coast. And we had a friend who lived in Nosara and who really recommended it. And for anyone who's listening who hasn't been to Nosara, it's just a wonderful little surf community. If you like surfing, it's a great place to be. And it's close to relatively close to Manuel Antonio and other sites in Costa Rica. And so we just really wanted to try living in Costa Rica just to see what it was like.
Yeah.
And so that's why we moved down there.
I mean, were you sad to leave?
It started getting really hot as we were leaving. So no, we weren't that sad to leave. I was ready to get back to the US, and we've lived abroad before. We lived in Egypt for a year, and we traveled over the Middle East overland for a long time. And I lived in Iraq for a little while. So it wasn't totally foreign to us to be in a foreign country or living in a foreign country, but it really was. Costa Rica is a really wonderful place.
What drew you to studying history as an undergrad?
I just thought it was really interesting. I went to Yale for my undergraduate degree and started in economics and thought economics was fun, but there's a lot of math. And I just started taking these history classes and just sort of fell in love with it, particularly the sort of a sub-branch known as intellectual history, which is tracing how ideas spread. What is the germination of an idea? How does it move to other people? How does it expand? Why do some ideas take hold and others don't? And so I found intellectual history just to be totally fascinating and really, really enjoyed it. And it's turned out to be a really good training for being a journalist, where much of what you do as a journalist is you sort of explore how the stories that people tell themselves about why they're behaving certain ways, which oftentimes comes down to an idea about how the world works or a story about how the world ought to work. And so it's been really good training for that.
It's great to hear that because, hearing your story, you're just like, well, this is just what I was interested in, what I was drawn to. It's so easy to kind of try to pick the practical thing. Well, there aren't many job opportunities in history, but I've heard this time and again where people kind of follow their interests, and then this skill set, this set of knowledge, whatever, all the things that are involved in what you pursue inevitably seem to come into play later in life at some point in whatever field you choose. And in fact, I think that can breed creativity when you're pulling ideas from separate silos and bringing them into your sort of sphere.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be somewhat practical, right? Like after getting a degree in intellectual history and building a company, I went to business school and got an MBA, which is a fairly practical degree, right? It's not a lot of theory there. It's more how to actually do it. But I think you're right. I mean, I think for people who are smart and clever and creative, you find opportunities that aren't obvious to others. And the act of finding that opportunity is what creates value. And so in many ways, having expanding your set of priors or your set of knowledge so that you can recognize opportunities when they pop up is a really valuable skill to develop in yourself.
How do you personally recognize those opportunities? It seems like you've been able to, through the books you've written, the career you've created as an author, sort of write the definitive book on fill in the blank, in this case, communicating, right? I'm just wondering, when you're choosing projects, how do you go about that? What's the lens through which you make the decisions? Is there anything do you consider, I don't want to say like your legacy or be too dramatic about it, but do you think about that type of stuff? Like, how do you choose these projects? Because you spend a substantial amount of time researching, writing. I don't know how long it took you. I mean, you could tell us how long it took you to write this book and all the work that went into it, if you can even count the hours. So it's a huge commitment and you've done it before. How do you choose?
Well, I think so. A lot of it just has to do with personal curiosity. When I wrote The Power of Habit, which came out about 12 years ago, I was really just curious in like how to improve my own habits. Like at the time I was a reporter at the New York Times, and I had this basic question, which is like, if I'm so smart and so talented, like, why is it so hard for me to get up and go running in the morning? Why is it so hard for me to lose 5 pounds? And it really came down to habits. And so I started investigating, what do we know about the science of habit formation? If I wanted to improve my habits, what do I need to know about that? And the book that resulted was The Power of Habit, which I think, sort of defined the category that people didn't even realize existed. And with Supercommunicators, my most recent book, it was very similar, that I had this basic question, which is, I'm a professional communicator, but why are there times when I do such a bad job of communicating? Why do I get into fights with my wife where like I know the fight is stupid and I know it's because she brings to me something she wants to talk about and I try and solve her problem rather than listen and empathize with her problem? So what's going on there? Can researchers tell us something about best practices, about how to succeed at this? And that's where Supercommunicators came from, was discovering that, in fact, this is something that's being studied right now very robustly, and that there are some people who are exceptionally good communicators, and that they have skills that any of us can learn, that it's not something you're born with. It's not something that is a inherent character trait. It's simply a set of skills that any of us can learn. Any of us can become a super communicator.
Well, let's get into some of the skill sets. It's funny that you used that example because I was thinking about my own personal life with my wife and thinking sometimes in my head, I'm like, don't say this. You shouldn't say this. This isn't going to help the conversation. And still it comes out. And so reading your book was a joy because it gave me some tactics on this. I wanted to start at the end for the beginning. I guess at the end of the book, you said, because whether we call it love or friendship or simply having a great conversation, achieving connection, authentic, meaningful connection is the most important thing in life. That statement sort of tells me that perhaps writing this book maybe even changed how you live your life in some way, or your definition of success. Can you expand on that a little bit? Maybe I'm way off base, but.
Well, I think that I think one of the things, there's this thing known as the Harvard study of adult development, where they followed around thousands of people now for over 80 years, trying to figure out what are the preconditions that lead when someone gets older to them being happy and healthy and successful, however they define success? And the researchers had a whole bunch of theories. Some of them were that because this was being done at Harvard and it started, back in the 1920s, some of the theories were things like, if you go to Harvard, you're definitely going to be happy, healthy, and successful as you get older, which turns out not to be true. There was a very sort of parochial take on lifestyles. And so they said, well, if you get married and you don't get divorced, then you're going to be happy, healthier, and successful. And that turned out not to be completely true on its own. In fact, they only found one thing that really was a good prediction of whether you would be happy and healthy and successful at age 65. And that's if you had a handful of close relationships at age 45. And that doesn't mean that you have to talk to those people every day. It doesn't mean you have to be in constant contact with them. But it does mean that you need to have conversations with the people that matter to you ever so often, right? If there's a friend you haven't talked to in 4 or 5 months, you should give them a phone call and you should catch up with them. And you'll feel just as connected as you were before because of that. And so I think that one of the things that I took away from the book, writing the book, was the importance of building those relationships and nurturing those relationships. It's really easy to get so busy that we stop reaching out to people. We lose touch with them. We don't, and it's going to be awkward, right? We're like, we haven't talked in 6 months and I don't remember their kid's name or how old they are. So like the first 5 minutes of the conversation is going to be kind of awkward. And so we put it off and we don't do it. And yet if we do it, we are not only making ourselves more happy and successful, we are making ourselves healthier. The Surgeon General of the United States has said that being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And 15 cigarettes a day is a lot of cigarettes, right? That's like not a small number of cigarettes. And I think that the way that we combat loneliness, the way that we learn about new opportunities that might not pop up on our radar, the way that we give our life meaning and purpose is usually in conversation with other people. And so I'd say that's been one of the big changes that I've taken to heart, is the importance of doing that.
Do you do that systematically, or is it more like intuitively for you? Just like, I haven't talked to so-and-so in a while. I'd really like to.
It's more intuitively. I think that something comes up and it reminds you of someone and you thought, I haven't seen them in 6 months. I should drop them a note. And sometimes it's just a matter of literally dropping a note saying hey, I saw this, made me think of you. Hope you're doing well. Right. You don't want to write a big missive because then they feel like they have to write a missive back. But yeah, I try and look for the opportunities to be reminded of people. And when I'm with my kids or my wife or my friends, we also spend a lot of time planning events for our friends, right? So the trips that we take together or sort of getaways where all the families come and we, rent some houses and sort of hang out for a week. I think all of that stuff is really, really useful. It helps just keep the relationship alive.
Yeah. It's so meaningful. And every time you have gatherings like that, or I talked to a friend today, just as you described, somebody I haven't talked to in quite a long time. And it did feel really good afterwards. And I was like, why don't I do this more often? How do we approach this? I mean, you have various frameworks in this book. Of course, we're going to encourage people to read it. We can't cover them all today, but if this type of conversation, let's go through the types of conversation perhaps first. And then maybe I'm thinking this portion of the conversation is perhaps the practical portion, let's say. I don't know how you would define it. If we're taking a meta look.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Yeah. What's the best place to start? Because but I'm just thinking about all the difficult conversations people have to have, whether it's, confrontational, different conversation with their boss or their spouse. And then there's obviously the friends and all these dynamics.
So I think one of the big things is when I first approached researchers and asked them, when me and my wife have a conversation and, I might come to her with something that happened at work and she offers me a solution, and I don't want a solution. I want her just to listen and to empathize and to tell me how special and awesome I am. When that's happening and we know that we're making this mistake, we know that the conversation is going awry. Why is that occurring? What's happening inside our heads? And what researchers said is a couple of things. They said, first of all, we're really glad you showed up because we're living through this golden age of understanding communication. Because of advances in neural imaging and data collection, we can actually see inside people's brains what's happening when they talk to each other for really the first time in history. And the second thing they said is one of the big things that we've learned from doing those studies is that when you're having a discussion, you assume you know what that discussion is about, right? You think that you're talking about your day or where to go on vacation next year or the kids' grades. But actually, they said what's happening during that discussion is that you're having multiple kinds of conversations. And in general, these conversations tend to fall into one of three buckets. There's these practical conversations, as you mentioned, where we're solving problems or we're making plans together. But then there's also emotional conversations where I tell you what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize, right? I want you to show me that you're listening. And then finally, there's also social conversations where we talk about how we relate to each other, how we relate to society, the social identities that are important to us. And what the researchers told me is they said, look, all three of these different types of conversations are all equally valid, right? And in one discussion, you might move from conversation to conversation. You might start emotional and then get practical and then go to social and then back to emotional. What's important, though, is that if you're not having the same kind of conversation at the same moment, you're not going to be able to hear each other, right? So if I'm having an emotional conversation and my wife is having a practical conversation, then we're not going to be able to actually hear what the other person is saying. And so what we need to do is we need to get aligned in what kind of conversation we're having. And this is known within psychology as the matching principle, that successful communication requires having the same kind of conversation at the same time. And when we do it, once we're aligned, once we're having the same kind of conversation, we both agree, okay, we're going to start practical, then we can move to emotional to social back to practical together almost intuitively. But it's about becoming aligned in the first place that really, really matters.
That's great. I think that, of course, on the surface level, that may seem much easier if you know the person well. What if it's...
Well, not necessarily, right? So one of the things, I mean, they teach teachers how to do this in classrooms, right? They say, look, if a student comes up to you, whether you know that student well or not, one of the first things that you should do before having a conversation with them is ask them, do you want to be helped? Do you want to be hugged? Or do you want to be heard? Which, of course, is the practical, the emotional, and the social. And what's amazing is anyone with teenagers, or younger kids, try this at home. And what you'll find is your kids will tell you right away what they need, right? They're what they're looking for. They'll say either like, no, I don't need a hug. I just need you to know that like Jimmy's being mean to me. And hopefully you'll punish him. So what's important is not necessarily knowing the other person, but looking for clues and being willing to inquire. What kind of conversation are we having? When my wife and I start a conversation, oftentimes she'll say, it seems like there's something that's bothering you. Do you want me to help you solve this problem? Or do you want me just to listen? Do you just need to get it off your chest? And oftentimes I say, oh, no, you don't have to solve this. This is just driving me crazy. I need to tell someone about it. I just need to get it off my chest. Right. So the more explicit we are in asking and telling others what kind of conversation we're looking for, the easier it is to have those conversations. But we can also look for clues.
Helped, hugged, or heard. I don't have any tattoos, Charles, but I could definitely imagine getting that one just so I remember to say that. That's just such a powerful, practical thing you can do.
It's wonderful. It really is, it changes a whole conversation because that other person knows that you actually want to give them what they're looking for. And it also causes them to take a second and figure out what they need, what they want, which is really useful.
What do you see as some of the other core principles in this book that you think would be important for listeners to walk away with?
So I think one of the big questions is, how do we determine what kind of conversation is happening if we don't ask? Right? Because in some settings, you can't ask someone if they want to be helped, hugged, or heard. That doesn't make sense at work. But what we can do is we can ask questions. And not all questions are created equal. There's a special category of questions that psychologists refer to as deep questions. And a deep question is something that asks me about my values or my beliefs or my experiences. And that can sound a little bit intimidating when I put it like that, but it's as simple as, if you meet someone who's a doctor, instead of asking them, oh, what hospital do you work at? You could ask them, oh, what made you decide to go to medical school? Right? That second question that invites the person to tell you something real about who they are. They're going to talk about their experiences when they're young, or they're going to tell you about their values that make this work meaningful to them. And so when we ask a deep question, even if it doesn't appear like a deep question, when it invites the other person to say something real and meaningful, what we do is we get a sense of what mindset they're in, whether they're in the practical mindset, the emotional mindset, or the social mindset. Take that doctor question. The same person asks that question, depending on sort of how they're feeling that day. They might say something like, oh, I decided to become a doctor because I wanted to make sure I had a job where like there would always be demand for me. I would always be able to get a new job. Okay, so that person right now is in a practical mindset, right? But that same person in a very different setting, in a very different mindset, might say, oh, I decided to become a doctor because I saw my dad get sick when I was a kid. And I decided I wanted to be a healer. I wanted to be that person who helped him. Okay, so that person's in a social mindset. By asking deep questions, people tell you what mindset they're in and what kind of conversation they're looking for. And so one of the first and best things that we can do is we can get in the habit of asking deep questions, which is a lot easier than it seems once we start looking for those opportunities.
How do you suggest people balance that with deep listening? Because that can be difficult. One of the practices of deep listening, I would say, is you're not trying to think of the next question to ask. You're not trying to hold on to your point and just you're losing track of what that person is saying. You want to listen and respond, but you also have these concepts and some of these things going on in your head, perhaps. Again, there's no magical solution, I'm sure, but I'm just curious about your advice around that.
Well, yeah, I think they're pretty compatible, right? Because I think once you ask that deep question, and it's not like a deep question is something you have to premeditate, right? It's like if somebody says, oh, I live on the West Side, it's as simple as saying, oh, what do you like about the West Side? Like why'd you decide to move there, right? That's a deep question. It's asking them about their experiences. And once they start answering that question, when we hear this phrase listening or deep listening, oftentimes what we think it means closing our mouth and opening our ears and paying attention. And that's part of it, but that's not enough on its own. Because deep listening and close listening also requires us to be active. It requires us to participate. It requires us to speak. In fact, there's a technique for this that's known as looping for understanding that they teach at Harvard and Yale, a bunch of other fancy places. And it has these 3 steps. Step 1 is you ask a question, preferably a deep question. Step 2 is after the person answers that question, you repeat back what you heard them say in your own words, right? And what you're really doing there is you're proving to them that you're paying attention. Now, the reason why this is really useful is because if my assignment to myself is I have to pay enough attention to you to kind of repeat back in my own words, showing that I've been thinking about this and processing it, I'm going to repeat back what you told me. I don't have the luxury of thinking of the next question. I don't have the luxury of like letting my attention wander. I really have to pay attention to you. I really have to pay attention to what you're saying. So that's step 2. Step 3 is the step that I always forget, which is after you've repeated back what you heard the person say, ask them if you got it right. Did I hear you correctly? Am I getting this? Because what we're doing at that moment is we are asking them for permission to acknowledge that we were listening. And that's really, really powerful because if I believe that you are listening to me, I become more likely to listen to you in return. And so when it comes to listening, what's important is paying enough attention that you could repeat what was going on or asking follow-up questions. And if you're in the moment of the conversation, it's going to be really easy to do that because you are paying attention. Your part of your brain is whirring along being like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why he did that. And what's interesting is if you look at the transcripts of really great conversations, they look like a mess, right? They don't look like 2 people giving eloquent speeches and like sort of just like saying everything perfectly. No, the best conversations you've had and I've had and everyone's had, they're total messes. People are interrupting each other. The topic is getting changed all the time. It's going in weird directions. That's what makes for a great conversation is being in that moment and being connected to the person, not saying the perfect thing. And so the more that we pay attention to them, the more that we show them that we're paying attention to them, the easier it is to really listen to what they're saying.
That's such great advice. It also takes a weight off in some ways when you come home from a conversation, sometimes you might think, oh, but when I said that, was it weird? Or, you could doubt yourself sometimes. But
yeah, you don't really have to doubt yourself, because I think you're probably having that conversation just right. And the fact that nobody remembers what was said in a conversation. They remember how the other person made them feel. And so what's really important is don't focus so much on the words coming out of your mouth. Focus on whether you're trying to show this person that you want to connect with them, and whether you're actually listening to them, and whether you're having a good time in the conversation. If the conversation feels real and meaningful to you, it probably did to them as well.
Do you approach conversations you have as a journalist in the same way if you're interviewing a subject, or like we're doing here, we're having this conversation and, perhaps it's going to be published in an article or in a podcast or something like this. What is your best advice for, maybe this is a bit of a selfish question as somebody who has conversations on a podcast, but yeah, are there any specific principles from the book you want to share around that? Or is it's just the same sort of idea?
I would say an interview is different from a conversation, right? A conversation is really about back and forth. So if this was more of a conversation, less of an interview, like I would be asking you a lot of questions, and it would be both of us kind of participating equally. But in an interview, our goal is a little bit different. It's not necessarily to have an exchange of ideas. It's to learn something sort of specific. And so oftentimes when I'm doing interviews as a journalist, much like you are now, I'm asking a lot of questions, but not telling a lot of opinions about myself or a lot of stories about myself, because I'm much more interested in learning about the other person. My goal isn't necessarily for them to walk away thinking, oh, Charles is so interesting and smart. My goal is to walk away saying, I understand what that other person's work. And so I can use it to write an article. So I would say the first thing to recognize is that interviews are different from conversations. The second thing to recognize is that not everything has to be a conversation, right? Sometimes you get into a taxi and you just want to check your email. You don't want to have a conversation with the driver. Sometimes you sit down on a plane and you don't want to engage with the person next to you. You just want to kind of watch the videos that are on your iPad. And that's okay. No one should ever have to have a conversation that they don't want to have. What is important is that when you do want to have a conversation, a real conversation, that you have these skills, these tools in your back pocket that you can use in order to do so.
So the other thing you talk about is mood and energy matching and vulnerability. And some of that can, I guess they can play in the same sandbox occasionally. Do you have any advice to share around that? Because that can be, for energy matching, for example, if you're not naturally inclined to be sort of the uppity kind of, high energy person, and you have a friend who's like that could be challenging for some people. I'm just curious what your advice is around that.
Yeah. So let's talk, because energy matching someone's energy does not mean that if they're an extrovert, you have to be an extrovert. What it does mean, and let's talk about what vulnerability is, because vulnerability has a very specific definition in neuroscience. We tend to think of vulnerability as I need to cry on your shoulder or tell you something about my mom. That's not what vulnerability is. What vulnerability is it's a very specific neural cascade that is triggered when I tell you something that you could judge. Right now, I might not care about your judgment. I might tell you that I think Star Trek is better than Star Wars. And you might think that I'm an idiot for thinking that, because Luke Skywalker is definitely cooler than Captain Kirk. But I don't care, right? The fact that you disagree with me, it doesn't really mean that much. But when I tell you something that you could judge, it sets off a cascade that causes a sense of vulnerability in me. And at that moment, because of how our brains have evolved, if instead of judging me, you withhold judgment, and equally more important, if you share something about yourself that I could judge about you, then suddenly we feel connected to each other, even if we disagree with each other, even if we root for different political candidates or we root for different sports teams, we will feel more connected to each other through this act of vulnerability. So this gets to this energy question, right? When I come to you and I'm obviously excited and I say, oh my gosh, this is so great. I got so much great news. If you show me that you're listening by reflecting back that excitement, just by saying, oh, that's so exciting. Like, tell me about the news. Then it shows me that you're listening to me. Now that I might be a huge personality, really outgoing, and you might be more reserved, but that's not what energy matching is. What energy matching is showing you that I'm listening to what kind of energy is in your voice. And in doing so, I'm proving that I'm paying attention. I'm proving that I'm listening. It doesn't mean that I have to change how I behave. It just means that I have to show you to say like, oh, that's so exciting. Or if somebody comes up and they're obviously down, to say, it seems like you're having a tough day. Like, tell me what's going on. That's how we match energy in a way that allows us to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability creates a sense of connection.
Yeah, this is gold, because I know we hear these stories of families getting broken up because of political differences, for example, and things like that. So this is a place where people can find a way to meet. I have just one more question, and I mean, we have quite a lot of material to cover, but people will have to read the book if they want to dive deeper. You got some great specific examples in the book and everything. I really enjoyed it. To wrap it up, what is your sort of number one takeaway that you would want people to walk away with from this episode?
Yeah, I think. Well, let me start by asking you a question. If you were having a bad day and you wanted to call someone who you know would make you feel better, does the person who you would call pop into your mind? Like, do you know who you would call?
Yeah, it's funny because a few faces popped up depending on the subject, I guess.
Yeah. So tell me one of them. Like, who's one person who popped into your mind?
My buddy Joe, for example.
Okay. So for you, Joe is a super communicator, and you're probably a super communicator back to Joe, right? You know how to ask each other the right questions. You know how to hear the clues in each other's voices. You know how to prove to each other that you're listening by asking follow-up questions or saying, oh, what I hear you saying is this. You're using a set of skills with Joe that we're sometimes not aware of as skills. We think of them as like, oh, this is just what I do with Joe, as opposed to this is a set of skills that I could use with anyone. We are all super communicators at one time or another. But there are these people who are consistent super communicators, these people who can connect with almost anyone. And the only real difference is they have recognized that I can treat anyone like I treat Joe. Right? I can sit down on a bus and I can talk to a stranger the same way that I talk to Joe. I can go to work and I can talk to my boss the way that I talk to Joe. And that doesn't mean that I have to be overly familiar or that I have to be too casual, but there are skills there that I'm using. I'm proving that I'm listening. I'm asking deep questions. I'm looping for understanding. I'm paying attention to what kind of conversation is happening, and I'm trying to match the other person. The big idea that I hope everyone walks away with is anyone can become a super communicator. In fact, we all are super communicators. Our brains have evolved to be great at communication. And the only question is, do you want to take those skills and practice them a little bit until you can do it with anyone?
Love it. Where do you want people to go to find the book? Is it your website?
Yeah, absolutely. So Supercommunicators and The Power of Habit are both sold on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and anywhere you buy your bookstores, including your local independent bookshop, which is a wonderful place to buy books. If you want to find me, I have a website, charlesduhigg.com, Duhigg. And I have a newsletter on Substack called The Science of Better. And if you just come to my email address is on my website. So if you come to it, you'll be able to figure out how to contact me.
Amazing. Can I ask you what's next? Is there a secret project?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out right now.
All right. Well, go catch some waves, I guess. That'll always clear the mind.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, it's time for our special destination spotlight showcasing Baltimore, Maryland. Now, it's time for a destination spotlight. When you are in the northeastern United States, you might be planning trips to Washington, D.C., or perhaps New York City. Of course, amazing destinations in their own right, but I know you love those off the beaten path, hidden gems. That is why today I'm going to tell you about an under-the-radar destination that is super affordable and loaded with incredible travel experiences. I'd also consider it to be one of America's most underrated cities. I'm talking about Baltimore, Maryland. aka Charm City. It earns its nickname. And that's the destination spotlight today. We're going to give you the best of Baltimore, which is an unforgettable, authentic getaway. So don't make this just a one-day trip. Be sure you stop over and spend some time. Here's why. Because Baltimore's special right now. It's one of the most affordable cities on the East Coast, which means it attracts musicians and artists and writers and entrepreneurs and creatives and on, who together create this deep, layered, and distinct culture, which is unlike any other city. And that is what makes this right now a special time to visit. And Baltimore is one of those places where you can treat yourself without breaking the bank. I'm going to share my curated itinerary, the things I plan on seeing, doing, and eating on my next Baltimore getaway. And I would encourage you, of course, to dive deeper and plan your own trip at baltimore.org, which is an amazing resource for planning. I'll give you an example. They have an article, Things to Do in Baltimore for $25 or less. Speaking of affordable, they have great articles like that to help you plan your trip. Now, instead of doing this chronologically, which I thought, yes, I could do that. I would show up day one, day two, do this and that. I decided to break this up by category because everybody has different interests and you may want to mix and match this to your liking. So first up, we're going to talk about museums. I wanted to highlight a few of them, actually more than a few, because there are so many great ones. First of all, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture, quote, documents, interprets, and preserves the complex experiences, contributions, and culture of Black people in Maryland, end quote. This museum is the best resource for information and inspiration about the lives of African Americans who helped weave the fabric of this particular region of the country. Something not to miss there, by the way. They have an exhibit called Eyewitness. That's the letter I, Witness, Media and the Movement. It's an exhibit that commemorates the 60th anniversary of the monumental Civil Rights Act of 1964 by examining how media, including radio, television, and photography, and the press, have impacted the modern American civil rights movement. Super interesting. Don't miss that. Okay, next up, we have the American Visionary Art Museum, whose exhibitions, quote, seamlessly combine art, science, philosophy, humor, and especially social justice and betterment, end quote. Now, here's what I love the most and how they explain what you will take in on their website. They say this museum highlights, quote, art produced by self-taught individuals, usually without formal training, whose works arise from an innate personal vision that revels foremost in the creative act itself, end quote. I love that sentence. It's beautiful. And also, I've never heard of a museum with that particular focus. Totally unique. I have to check that one out when I'm there. And of course, I'd be missing a big attraction if I failed to mention the Baltimore Museum of Art, which houses the largest publicly accessible Matisse collection in the world. If you're into art, it's something you won't want to miss. And one last thing, don't miss seeing the famous painted screens. It's a uniquely Baltimore art form where wire screens are painted with colorful scenes. The painted screens are more visible in the Highland Town neighborhood, and you can see some in Fells Point as well, which is another neighborhood we're going to get to in a few moments. Lastly, I have to mention the National Aquarium because this is my first Baltimore memory as a visitor. I have a lovely memory of visiting this world-class aquarium as a child. I'd love to go back and see the thousands of animals housed in the aquarium, including dolphins, sharks, jellyfish, turtles, snakes, and birds. Definitely something to check out. Now, let's move on to travel experiences. I called this category. Of course, the museums are travel experiences as well, but these were things that didn't maybe fit into other things. Now, I included a few photo ops in here because I know, sometimes running around taking some cool photos is part of the travel experience for some people. And so I wanted to throw that in there as well. Now, here are some things I'd love to see and do. And I love these little travel missions when I get to a place, like these things that allow me to hop on some public transportation, maybe check out some new neighborhoods. And we have a nice mix for you here. First of all, the George Peabody Library. It's connected to Johns Hopkins University. It houses 300,000 volumes. But what makes it picture-worthy is its breathtaking interior. You may have seen it before. It's a bit famous, I would say. It's been called a, quote, cathedral of books, and is just generally recognized as one of the most beautiful libraries in the world. And I'm a huge fan of libraries, so I want to go check this place out. Its frosted glass skylight illuminates 5 floors, featuring ornate cast iron balconies and books. You add in the black and white marble on the tile on the floor, and this place feels like a book lover's literal heaven. It's gorgeous and free to visit. So I'm definitely going to put that on my itinerary. And if you want the best picture featuring a backdrop of the city, those are nice to have. You can go to Federal Hill Park and stand by the cannons. That's where you'll get an incredible backdrop of the city. And I also encourage you to get around using Baltimore's water taxi system, which is unique to the area. It is one of the most enjoyable ways to experience the city's waterfront neighborhoods and attractions. Of course, when you're out in the water, you'll get stunning, unobstructed views of Baltimore skyline and waterfront that you can't get any other way. You're going to see the city from the same vantage point that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner during the Battle of Baltimore in 1814. Did you know? He wrote it there. Nice little fact. I slide that right in. Okay. It's also an efficient way to explore Baltimore's distinct waterfront neighborhoods. So you get kind of the best of everything with Baltimore's water taxi system. Okay. Lastly, if it's baseball season, I would highly recommend catching an Orioles game at Camden Yards. Camden Yards, in a way, you could say, revolutionized baseball architecture when it opened in 1992 by rejecting what was popular at the time, those huge concrete stadiums, in favor of this retro classic design that was a homage to baseball's roots while still offering modern amenities. It's also a downtown ballpark, which I love because it makes it an easy walk to downtown restaurants and bars. And what makes an Orioles game special here isn't just the baseball, because if you're not a baseball fan, I'm still going to encourage you to do this, because like the city's motto, you won't get it till you get here. You need to attend a game to find out for yourself what makes it great. Okay, let's talk food. Every traveler is on the hunt for good food right now. I love going out to breakfast personally, and even though it's nice to find those less crowded spots, I'm also willing to wait in line to visit a restaurant that is a bit of an institution. That place here is Miss Shirley's, the original location in Roland Park, now in their 20th year. I am going to order the crab hash and fried green tomato eggs Benedict, because that just sounds yummy, and I'm going to follow it up with a chocolate chip cookie donut for dessert. Are you kidding me? I know, that sounds insane. Okay, for lunch and dinner, you can head over to Fells Point, where there is no shortage of options to eat, drink, and be merry. Founded in 1763, Fells Point is a waterfront area that offers maritime history, of course, but also these charming streets that appear to be made out of cobblestones, but another fun fact, they're actually made out of Belgian block. You can grab a bite at Thames Street Oyster House. If you don't love oysters, their lobster roll consistently ranks among the best in the country, not just Baltimore. And their cast iron crab cakes would be my personal go-to menu item. If you like cocktails, talking local distilleries, you have the Baltimore Spirits Company. They have a distillery and a tasting room. You got Sagamore Spirit and Old Line are a couple others you might enjoy. Now, you would be missing out if you didn't have the Maryland blue crab experience. Nick's Fish House sounds like my kind of place. It's a waterfront location coupled with a more casual atmosphere with picnic tables covered in brown paper, maintaining that traditional crab house vibe. And it sounds like the perfect backdrop for a crab feast, for me anyway. Maybe you're vibing with that. Okay, you might want to go souvenir shopping. It's fun to shop around, go into the stores. You can find unique shops and local makers all around the city. But Hamden neighborhood is a great place to start. Hamden epitomizes what the locals call, quote, Hun culture, which is a celebration of working class Baltimore with a quirky vintage aesthetic. Sounds super interesting, right? That's because it is. Stroll along 36th Street, known as the Avenue, where independent shops like Atomic Books, which, by the way, serves as famous filmmaker John Waters' personal mailbox. That was something I learned when I was producing this for you. And they offer locally made crafts and unique gifts. Whew. Okay, as we wrap up our journey through Baltimore, it's clear that this is a city that I think deserves to be explored, not just on a short day trip, because when you have time to dig in and truly experience Baltimore, you'll find that it offers experiences that are genuine, unpretentious, and distinctly its own. It's a place where affordability breeds creativity and where cultural institutions are actively rewriting narratives to be more inclusive and representative. So whether you're catching an O's game at the revolutionary Camden Yards, perhaps you're exploring the nation's largest collection of self-taught art, maybe hopping between those distinct neighborhoods on the scenic water taxi, Baltimore rewards visitors who come with an open mind and a curious spirit. I know that's you. So thank you for letting me get this underrated gem on your travel radar. The charms of Charm City await. And be sure to plan your trip now at baltimore.org. And I want to thank the folks at Visit Baltimore for helping me put this together and for supporting our show. Thank you so much. Enjoy your trip to Baltimore. There you have it. First and foremost, I want to thank you, my friend, for being a part of this community and for listening to this episode. Of course, this is a community-powered show, and I invite you to get in touch anytime if you have any guest recommendations, topics you want me to cover, you just want to say hi. Of course, you can always sign up for our newsletter and stay in touch over there as well at zerototravel.com/newsletter. I want to quickly also thank Charles Duhigg for his time and the folks over at baltimore.org and Visit Baltimore for helping me craft this special destination spotlight for you, featuring all of the best things to see, do, and eat in Baltimore, Maryland, aka Charm City. Okay, I'm going to leave you with a quote now to wrap this one up, as I mentioned at the top, from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. This one, of course, I thought something around communicating would tie this one up pretty nicely, and I think this one does the job. Here's what he said. Quote, wise men talk because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.